Hello and welcome back. In parts 1 and 2 we looked at how to set up Photoshop correctly and to use the right tools and settings. And in this part 3 we're going to take a look at how to open and save files from Photoshop so that they're compatible with other programs like Lightroom and other third-party software. So let's jump in and see what we need to do. So getting a file into Photoshop for editing, there are several ways to do that. And the first way, the most obvious way probably, is to take a processed raw file from Lightroom and open it in Photoshop for further editing. And how the file is saved from Photoshop is determined by the settings from within Lightroom. And that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but this is the way it works. So to determine how the file is going to be processed and edited in Photoshop, bearing in mind that what you're looking at is a preview of how the file will look when rendered. It's not been rendered yet. You've still got a view here of a raw file with some processing applied to it. It's not a viewable file yet. So let's go up to Edit, Preferences, and we go to the External Editing tab, and this is where we tell Photoshop how the file needs to be handled when we save it. So we're taking it to Photoshop. The file format would be either PSD or TIFF. PSB is for a large Photoshop file, but generally if you're going to be doing editing in other programs outside of Lightroom and Photoshop, then TIFF is the safer format. I'll leave this at Photoshop for the moment. And then we have our color space, and we want to render the file in the largest available color space, which is ProPhoto RGB. And then we have the bit depth, which determines how many steps in tone we have from the lighter to the darker tones. 16 bits we want to maintain, again, the maximum color information possible. And the resolution, 360 dpi if you're going to print this on a Epson printer, and 300 if you're going to print on a Canon printer. We don't want to compress the files. I don't have a high dynamic range monitor, so those settings are not going to be important to me. But then when we come down to the bottom, we've got some settings here that will tell us how the file name is going to be set up. And I've got this set up as a custom setting. If I click on this drop down box, we can have it. We've got a number of preset types of settings here. We can have custom settings. If I go down to edit, I can then determine what those custom settings are going to be, and it's going to have the original file name, and then when I save it I'm going to add some further information. So that's how the file is going to be treated when it goes from Lightroom to Photoshop. So with those settings in place, we can now go ahead and open our file into Photoshop, and we'll do that, and then we'll save the file, and I'll show you how that naming convention works. So we click OK. To open the file in Photoshop, we either right mouse click and click on Edit in Photoshop, or we can go to the Photo menu and Edit in. Either one takes you to the same place. So we're going to go to Photoshop, and the file will open in Photoshop, and now we can have a look at the settings. So let's just jump over to Photoshop, and here we are. Now I'm not going to do any work on this image. This is purely demonstrating how we open and save files and to maintain all of the correct information. So let's assume I've done some further work in Photoshop. I would then go up to the File menu and either click on Save, in which case if I just click on Save, it's going to have the original file name without any other information. And let's just have a look at that. Original file name has a name appended to it, and it's a .nef, so it's still a raw file at this point. And so if I just clicked File Save, all that information would stay the same, except the suffix at the end would be PSD or TIFF. But what I like to do, I like to click on Save As. It takes me back to the source folder, which is obviously Scotland. Here's the default setting. It says original file name, and I would give this a name. I'm just going to call this test at this stage. I like to use uppercase so it's easier to read. And then it's a Photoshop file, and then all you need to do is click on Save. We're not going to do that now because I already have this saved elsewhere. So that's opening and saving a file from Lightroom back into Lightroom again. Now one other important thing is when you're doing this, if you're opening the file from Lightroom, and you're in the library or the develop module, and you're either in the source folder or a collection, provided you leave Lightroom open in that folder, when you click on Save As in Photoshop, the file will be saved back in to that appropriate folder, and it will reappear in this collection or the source folder. And that's very important. That saves you getting lost with trying to find where the file went eventually. If you leave Lightroom open, the file will appear back in here as a saved file. So why don't we do that just to prove that it works. So we'll go back to Photoshop, and it looks like I've opened that twice. Let's just go back here, File, Save As. I'm going to call this Test, and we'll just click on Save. It's going to save it back into that folder, and so it should now, if I come back to Photoshop, to Lightroom, we will now see there's the file. It's called Test, and it's right next to the raw file. So that's how we have the round trip from Lightroom to Photoshop and back again without losing our files and wondering where the hell they went. If you keep Lightroom open and you're sitting in that folder or that collection that it came from, it will reappear there, and it will sit alongside your original raw file. So that's opening from Lightroom. What about if we don't go via Lightroom? Let's look at that next. So what if you're not using Lightroom and you want to just open the file directly from Photoshop? Now you would need to go into File, Open, and then navigate to the appropriate folder where the file is existing, or in this case I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go to my recent file list because I had this file opened just a few minutes ago, and it will open. But of course we're opening a raw file, and it's going to open firstly in Camera Raw and give us the options to do processing. Now, because of the way I've set up Lightroom, in the options I've always written the processing data to a separate file. So even if I want to open this file without going via Lightroom, Photoshop will find that file attached to the raw file and provide all the processing. You can see here there's some various things being done. So this is going via Camera Raw. And how do you determine the file settings as we did in Lightroom? Well, we come all the way down to the bottom of this screen, and you'll see here there's a setting called Photoshop Workflow. That's my custom setting, but if we click on that, it opens up a similar panel to what we had in Lightroom, and it's called the Workflow Settings, and we can look at all of these other general settings. We're not really interested in so much now, but I've called this Photoshop Workflow for ease of identification, but here we have those same settings that we looked at from within Lightroom. The color space, Pro Photo RGB, 16 bits per channel, depth, the image sizing, that doesn't really make much difference. That just tells me what the resolution was of a cropped file. We have our 360 pixels per inch resolution. We don't want to apply any other things, but we do still have the option here of opening in Photoshop as a smart object, and of course we can do that from Lightroom as well. And if you're not sure about the processing you've applied in Lightroom or Camera Raw, and you may want to come back and do further adjustments in Camera Raw, you can open it as a smart object that allows you to come back and do some further treatment with the raw file settings. I'm not going to do that, but that's where you click on those settings. So that's where Camera Raw reads the information that determines how the file is going to be saved. And then we come down here and we've got a button that says Open. If I click on that little button, we've got Open as an object or a smart object, Open as a copy. Well, obviously we just want to click on Open, and then it renders the file into a viewable image and opens it in Photoshop. And then of course we have the same thing, because we've not gone through Lightroom. When we want to go to File, Save As, because it came from the original folder, it's going to go back into that original folder. I'm not going to do that. We've already done that a couple of times. So the same thing will apply if you're opening the file from within, say, Bridge, because Bridge will then open the file into Camera Raw, and then you will need to apply those settings and bring it into Photoshop. Now, while we're talking about opening the files in Photoshop and we've set those parameters such as the color space and the bit depth, there's one other little setting in Photoshop that we need to have a look at so that everyone has it set up correctly. And again, often Adobe by default has it set up incorrectly. So we want to go down into the Edit menu and we want to go to the color settings, spelt without a U. And being American, of course, they can't spell correctly. And so here we have the custom settings. Now, this is where it may get a bit confusing, but we have here the working color space, which is the environment that Photoshop is rendering the colors into. And you'll see here that the working color space is Adobe RGB. And that is because this color monitor has a color gamut that's very close to Adobe RGB. And yet you're going to say to me, but hang on, we opened this file as a Pro Photo RGB file and it's got larger amount of colors in it. Why are we then viewing it into Adobe RGB? Well, the reason is that the monitor can only display this amount of colors. So we're setting the working space to be Adobe RGB, and Photoshop or Adobe is going to convert the Pro Photo RGB image into a viewable image that fits within the color gamut of the monitor. There'd be no point in rendering the file as, or you're rendering it as a Pro Photo RGB and then having the display set to Pro Photo RGB as well when we know that it cannot display all of those colors. So what we need to do is we need to tell Photoshop that yes, we're going to have our working space as Adobe RGB and we want to use this conversion engine to convert it using the relative colorimetric conversion process to a viewable image that fits within the color gamut of the monitor. We're still retaining all that color information in the file, we're just slightly modifying it so that it fits within the viewable information that the monitor can provide. And then we have some couple of other policies here about the color management policies. We don't ever deal with CMYK or grayscale files, but what we want to do is we want to preserve whatever embedded profiles are in the file, and we don't tick this box that says ask when opening, because every time you open a file it'll say hang on, this file's got Pro Photo RGB and we're only looking at it in Adobe RGB. So we don't tick that box, we don't tick the one that says when pasting files, but if there's a missing color profile we want to know about that, because in that case, if there's no color profile associated with the file, when you open it, Photoshop's not going to know how to render the colors, and we may have to tell it to assume a certain setting. I mean, it's very rare that you get that. It may be something from a scanner, flatbed scanner or something like that, where there's no color profile, so you need to know that. But that's just the only other thing we need to worry about. Click on OK, and we're back into Photoshop, and then we can proceed with our editing. So that's how we handle the opening and saving of files between Photoshop, Lightroom, and even if you're not using Lightroom, how you handle the files. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.